Today's Ches Adar, Tashin Samech Tes. We're in Hemshik Samech Tes on Amid Chaf Beis.
Alright, so we're dealing with the union of Shem, and it was connected with the Etzem, and was Megala to a certain extent the Etzem, but it wasn't Kemui HaEtzem, and it wasn't in an Eifem from Devekis V'Gilui HaEtzem. And that was what we brought on there, Kama Dugmois. And the last one we bought was the Uda, that certain people are called with the same name. That you can have different B'nai Adam, Shenikoim B'Shem Meshovim. After became, we don't notice in the Shinui Hashemes what in effect we have to say is in Nifal the Shinui Hashemes. First of all, the Shem is nimshach from a certain etzem, and that's for sure that they all have different etzem. They all nimshach from different madregas etzem, and also since they're different, the nimshach from different madregas, each one with its own etzem. Then the highest, which is nimshach into each person or to each guf, also must be different. It can't be exactly the same. And yet none of those inyanim are nikah in the Shem, because the Shem is the same Shem by all of the people. So that was an indication that even though there's a connection between Shem and the Etzem of the Neshama, and also the highest, which is nimshach from that Etzem. And as we've already learned, that the Shem is like a kli between those two inyanim. That is the Etzem, the Neshama is L'mayla Mi'aguf, and then there's how the Oisias Hashem are kli, what they bring down the highest into the slapses in the Moech, and then later into the Guf, Chulu. And so we saw that connection with the Etzem and also with the highest, Animsha, into the body is Ikar Behelim. It's not a union from Gilui, from either side, not from its connection with the Shoresh Neshama, from whence the Neshama is nimshach into the Guf, and not the connection with the Etzem Chayas in the Guf. It's not Nikah, the different Eifanim that can occur in those Hamshachas, different people, which means that the Chiddush in this inyan is that the same Oisias must be poil in Yonim Shoinim, and that's the Chiddush. We have to say that it's not the same Hamshocha of the Chayas from the Etzem of one person compared to the Hamshocha of the Chayas from the Etzem of another, and yet nonetheless they have the same name. So mitzad echad, that's a indication of our point that the Shem is not begolui in either direction. It's a in shel helem. Aval idok is it a chiddush nifla that the same oisias can be mamshir in yonim shoinim muvdalim v'amadregosam or v'ifanim. Significantly, because we just pointed out that those people, even in their madregas ha'etzim, can be very different, and who are into the chayas ha'nimshach into the body. So that's a chiddush gadol. It can be the same name, and yet it can be poil in different ifanim. So exactly how that is hard for us to know. B'diuk ezer poel. But doubtless certain people, or certain great gifted individuals, Dahainu Nasiim and Rabbeim and Neshamas Kloliyas, they're able, in the Oisias Hashem, they're able to see at least significant inyanim v'negeh to the Adam, even though it may look to be the same name Begolui, but they can see in a different inyanim. And we have to say that the Oisias, as the Alter Rebbe points out in Shara Yichud, right near the end, the Alter Rebbe points out that the Oisias, the way they're written, each little prat in the ois is indicatory of a hamshocha miyuchedes al yodai. And in our Indian here, that would be the hamshocha from the madreigas etzem into the chayas of the Adam how it is begufay. So we have to say that all those pratim carrying themselves a ribui inyonim from combinations v'chuli, even though the Shem, the way it's written, is the same. And so we have to say that there are different ways that it's nimshach al yedei, different emphases within different pratim in those oases, even though b'klolos they're the same oases. So ultimately, I guess we have to say that everybody is called by the same name has a certain shaykhs, klolius, auch upon it to other people who are called by the same name, because it would be hard to say that ad kedekach the shinuyim are different if it all turns out to be written the same way. It's only a shinuyim in pratim, or b'klolos it seems to have a similarity. And that would be according to the Minhag Yisrael, which is a Navuah, sof kol sof, that people call the children after grandfathers and parents and chule, they call the same name. It must be the kavanah bezeh to be mamshich and megala certain inyonim, or upon him to try and to hope that certain inyonim found in that person will be nimshich into the shame by calling the same name, or in some way being goyim and aliyah, either in the person being called by the name or the person whose name was taken, as it's well known, the minig bezeh. But that would tend to indicate that there is a certain close similarity, even though in the pratim it's different. Because sof kol sof, you can't answer like it's written over there in Shara Yichud, that there's different combinations in the oasis and different shinuyim in the whole seder of the different, what we call tmures of don't we? He's talking the old trick. When you look at him, he looks at the person alongside him. So the hoinia from Malicha is put down in Hayom Yom. There's a whole, the whole comparison in Avodas Hashem to Malicha. You got to soak yourself in water, and then you got to soak yourself, and you got to do this. You got to burn out all the pesilas and all the domim, halbilti ratzuyim, and all the what Malicha involves in Avodas Hashem. So you can't say that because you're so busy with Malicha, therefore you slough in the Shirim and Ksidah. Pink verkeerd. If you're bocky in Malicha, then you have to have a lot of chayas in Yonik Ksidah. So we saw the Fiza. Okay, so now we go further. And the Rebbe says, V'hagam. And Hagam is like a kashia. In other words, it's leading into a question. V'hagam de gilu achayis harihu alidei oisius eilu davke. Sof kol sof, the gilu the chayis from the etzem out is lamaila, from the body into the body, is alidei precisely these oisius. In other words, once you've called your name, and that's a Navuah, as we said, that's Megala, what is really meant to be named. Once you've called that name, then only those oisias are the medium for which the Chayas is Miskala. And if Chonila, the mensch, were given another name, or he would be called another name, that can even be Mavalbul, the Oifen, the Amshachas, Achayas, B'toy Gufay. And therefore it's well known that you shouldn't call people by non-Jewish names and all sorts of inyonim which are not lefi the emes kavana of the name of chulu. Except that you can call people, it would seem, by affectionate type of nicknames which are like a play on their name. Because in Lubavitch they used to call somebody that was called Meir, for example, they used to call him Monya. And everybody knew that Monya meant Meir. And then they would call somebody Shneur Zalman, they would call him Zalminke or Schnierke or all sorts of expressions. Yeah, so we have to say that that's okay, because the kavanah there is the same with somebody called Yecheskel, as he was always called Chatzkel. That was very famous, the famous Mashpia in Lubavitch, Rabbi Yecheskel Fagin, as he was called Chatzki Fagin, as is well known that it was the custom to use on names, affectionate abbreviations or kitzurim of the name. That's a harmless in it. But to call somebody by a name, kinui, which is klal not their name, and not a union shokovit legabi their name, is not kedai. And the same thing is you have to be very careful not to call somebody by a non-Jewish name. So my mashpil, he was very makfid about it. There are certain people in the community in Australia, but they call them by goyish names, and he was very makfid not to do it. He always called them by the Hebrew name. So you shouldn't, because it can have an effect even at kerikach as to how to kill your madbik on a person, a shame which doesn't really belong to him. And people continually call it by that. It can interfere, it appears, with the even the Amshachas Chayas, which means that the emes of Chayas that you're supposed to get is Nimshach Alidei Oisius Elu, Davkidos Oisius. In a way, that tends to indicate that there's a close connection between the shame and the Chayas, which is Nimshach. And that's what he says. The Gilui of that Chayas, Harayu Alidei Oisius Elu Davke, Hainu Hashem Shalikru Boy. That's the name he's called by. Ve'im Kain, Harayesh Elu HaOisius Shaychus El HaChayas. We'll say that there's a close connection between those oisias and the chayas, because that's the way the chayas is nimshach through those oisias. As you kind of would seem to be a very close connection between the chayas and the oisias. And then he writes in brackets, Rabbi Umameila Gam Ela Etzem. It must be a connection between the name and the etzem, the madrigas anishoma l'mayla me'agur, from which the chayas is nimshach alidei these oisias. And therefore we have to say, if it's got a closeness to the chayas itself, then it must have a closeness to the etzem, meaning the madrigas anishoma l'mayla me'agur. Umavur b'mokim acher, these galas oisias hu lefi oifen etzem davke. Now this is another inyan, that his galas oisias hu lefi oifan etzem means that the oisias that you speak, the oisias that you use, not the oisias of your name, no, the oisias that you use and say and speak when you're giving forth anything in conversation, and particularly if you're giving forth a deliberate idea, then those oisias are lefi oifen ha'etzem. In other words, that they're not mamish gilui ha'etzem, but they're according, you can see from somebody's oisias what sort of a person he is. You can be maki his gadlus or his lack of same. You can be maki that he's an edel person, or that maybe cholil v'chas, not edel v'chule. You can see all sorts of inyonim about the etzem, as you might say, from the oisias that he uses. And that is because the oisias are appropriate to your etzem. There's a word of oifan of the etzem. Tezeu, and with that we can explain, sheyesh chiluchim b'chachomim. There's differences in certain great chachomim, meaning chachomim in Torah. The b'seichel echad, that in one basic concept, ze oimrei b'oisias elu, v'ze oimrei b'oisias achelim. One will say it in these oisias, and another will say it in other oisias, and that is hu lefi oifen etzem nafshoi davke. That is totally lefi the etzem of his neshama afilu lamayla b'yislapshus beguf. It's totally in his whole very essence what sort of a person he is, and where is his etzem? Is it kilo moving towards kedusha, or is it moving cholila otherwise? But chachomim, of course, it's mamish v'hayas madregas hakedusha, and yet nonetheless we find that they say things in different oisia, they don't put it in the same way, and they don't use the same sentences, and they come from a different angle, they emphasize certain inyonim in the sentences for chulu. And that's based on the famous kashi, that if the oisias are just according to the idea, and the whole end of the oisias is only to be kalim to the etzem concept, then it shouldn't matter who's talking, everybody should say it with the same oisia. You couldn't give over that concept if you didn't say it in exactly the accepted oisias for that concept, and everybody would have to use the same oisia. That would make sense, because the oisias have to be according to the concept. If the oisias are not according to the concept, then you'll never get the heck what you're hearing. You'll always be confused. So therefore, whoever says it, or whatever way it's written, it has to be that the oisias are carefully chosen to give out that idea. And yet nonetheless we see that it's not a fixed patent, that everybody gives and must give it out in these and these oisias, but everybody gives it out according to his own oisia. Everything. He said, and that is because the oisias that you give out are lefi oifen of your etzem. They're not megala, like we said, mamish begilui goma the etzem, but they're according to and lefi oifen your etzem. Now, there's certain people, be Indians there, and they say, what's it, seichel echad? What is the text? Seichel echad. The Chachomim say, seichel echad. It's very hard to say that the great Chachomim ever said anything which is mamish seichel echad compared to Chaverei. They all had something different slightly to say, and if they didn't, then they would have said it, because if they knew it was exactly the same as what had already been said, then they wouldn't have pushed themselves to say it, unless they are saying it in the name of somebody, unless they say, oh yes, I already heard this from Pliny, and this is what Pliny said, and then they give over what Pliny said. Oh, but if they're saying their own Indian in their own name, and in their own oisias, then it's another seichel, it's not much the same seichel. Certain people ask that catch, For example, sometimes it looks to be as if, Tesvus or somebody else, let's say the Ran or somebody like that, seem to be saying mamish the same thing at first glance. But when you look at it, you see that they're not really. They're really, each one has got his own particular chiddush in that inyan, and he's even been metakin what Tesa said, or he's got a kasha which is hidden in the understanding of the matter, and he's fixing that kasha up in the ways that he said it, even though it looks to be very. So we have to understand what the Rebbe means of it. Seichel echad, kol echad omer bo'is yeshalo, even though it's seichel echad. It's a little hard to understand that it's mamish seichel echad. So we have to say that it's more like in the arum, the tzov kosov, the Indian is the same basic issue. In other words, it's dealing with this and this issue in halacha. Each one is coming at it, so at least the normal factors that you need to know to understand this Indian should be the same and expressed the same, and that should be all uniform. And then maybe the slight different diktukim which are added by that particular chacham. So that's what the Rebbe means. And yet we see that each one can say it in completely different voices. It's very well known that some of the great Rishonim have their own particular sort of style, almost, the way they say things. And it's, for example, it's well known in the Ramban. He's got in certain places in his Chidushim, and even in his Pirush on the Torah, he's got a certain, you can pick, there's a very unusual signon in the way he says things. And sometimes it looks as if it's almost like a, lengthy and sort of almost metaphorical sometimes way of talking. That you could have said the sentence a bit shorter, or that's what the Rebbe means. That he doesn't mean b'diuk seichel echad, because our Amunah tells us that the great Chachamim don't really say one thing in their own name that somebody else has already said. And so it's not seichel echad, mamish. What he means is seichel echad, meaning the general around and the general topic and the background of the whole union, plus their deal. So a couple of sentences or a point could have been said maybe in a different way, of all the rest of it should have been the same. And we see even in that they say different in different expressions and different terminologies, and they come at it from another angle, and this one, he starts off with a certain deal and he comes to the same. Yeah, so we see that they all use very different methods of combination of oisias. That's what we have to assume that Rebbe means, to put it a little bit right, because certain people are very sort of in this kashia that you can't really say it's seichel echa. I know of a very long guy here in El Tzor. He wrote a whole series of different diktukim about that idea. So this is just one way of trying to put it right, that there shouldn't be anybody who might come along and ask you that particular shaila. But since I see nobody's particularly worried or concerned, he's not particularly concerned that somebody's going to ask him way deep in the middle of a page in Tofrei Samech Tes, he's going to ask him a kashia, it'll bother him, etc., etc. And so you can never tell. You can never tell. You never know what is likely to happen. And as the sifra I told you last night about if I'm bringing, you can just never know what is going to happen. Al pigoiro, mamish. And that's, of course, hopefully everybody understood that's a connection with Purim. Because Purim is the union from Goyro. The whole union from Purim. The word Purim means Goyro Lois. That's what it means. Come over in the Megillah itself. Yomim ha'elu nikoim Purim al Shem ha'pur hu ha'goyro al. And if whatever it shouldn't be, we see that each person talks out oisias according to what he is, and his oisias are lefi oifen ha'etzem shaloi, which means that the oisias have a strong kesher and a very close connection both with the chayas and with the etzem. What did it's well known, the famous piyah, that an emissary leader of the generation, emissary Nasi, he also has very, very special oisias, and that these oisias that are given to him, mamish milmaila. Because he's etzem, is be'etzem, shaykh lemaila, and he is be'etzem, the Nasi, and he's be'etzem, the manhig hakloli v'ha'achmi of that particular zman, and therefore his oisias are very, very miyuchad, and they're tremendously important. You have to be medactic per oisiasa v'chulu v'chulu. So you might say, where do you know that from? It stayed in some of at the beginning of Parsha Yisroi. So you might say, well, in my sum of there's no Parsha Yisroi. So you would be right, because there's no real mimer from Parsha Yisroi, but there is. Was it a tight? That in some of the Samavos, I don't know, even in the ones that you guys have got, in some of the Samavos is printed the first part of a Maimon that the Rebbe said in Yisrael, and after that, for some reason, the manuscripts are not available for that particular Maimon. Lamar v'sapele, that's the Matthias. But what he does write, right at the beginning of the Maimon, in that little piece that is there, he writes that the oisias are lefi etzem, for that particular person, and he brings a dogma that Rabbi Rashabi writes, "U'kemoy anosi, shel gader v'manig gader ahu, ha'oisias shaloi, nitonim loi." And he writes in Yiddish in brackets. He says, "Yechida shebenefesh shenktim oisias." That the chida of his nefesh gives him a gift of the oisias that he needs to say at any particular moment. Stay to it. So you might say, well, what was yechida? So what do we say every Hoshana, but not Hoshana of every Hoshanas, in the Yom Beis, a Yud Gimel from the Hoshanas, then we say yechida liyacha doch. The yechida is connected with the yochid shel oilam. Yechida is mamish one thing with the Eivishter. And if the yechida gives him oisias, then what does that mean? It really means that the Eivishter gives him oisias. And we have to say that the Rebbe was careful not to say too much at any given moment. He said yechida gives him the oisias. And what he really meant was that the Eivishter gives him the oisias. Yeah, they stayed on in that moment. Which means that somebody who's an etzem of a Nasi, he's got very special oisias that they are the oisias which that door is supposed to Hier, darf je dat zeggen? Ken mij.
So when a Navi says something, when a Navi says something, does he have to think about it at all, or does it just goes like he opens his mouth and just comes right out?
Or does he have to think about it? Oh, that's a good question. Well, you see, it depends slightly. That's a lengthy question to answer, but it depends slightly on what sort of Navi he is. What is Navi Stam, which I'm not belittling any Navi by saying that. He's a Navi Stam, or he's Moshe Rabbeinu. The Navu of Moshe Rabbeinu is very different and rare and elevated. But I will suffice it to say that the preparation for the Navu has to be very, very great from his side. You can't just be a Navi. Come over. Yeah, and it's brought down in the Hills Navuah from the Rambam, Baricha, that you've got to have all sorts of conditions, you've got to work at it, you've got to come to these pastures, Hagashmi, the whole thing, you just don't feel any connection with this world anymore, with the whole Baricha, Sa'inim, and the guns was brought down, but again, to Navuah. Just that it's a moment of the Navuah, it's shy to say that the Navi knows maybe what he's being told. Yeah, but he knows that his whole meaning is just to say that over. In other words, he's just become like as you might call a vessel and a kli at that particular moment to give over those particular oisias. You follow? And that's the greatness of Sefer Dvorim, Mishnah Torah, as it's called. Tosafos brings down that when Moshe Rabbeinu said Mishnah Torah, that he omri mipi atzmoi, aval al pi adivu. That's how Tosafos dances on both chasanas. Tosafos says that he said it mipi atzmoi, but that gufa was al pi ruach hakodesh mipi adivu, but they can't do it. And there we have the unbelievable combination of both. The Rebbe's got a whole sikh about it. And the Rebbe says that means that Moshe Rabbeinu was misatim with the Nevuah, and he actually was massing what the Nevuah is about, and then he gave it over. But you and the other force for him, he was just a funnel, and he just gave it over. And the greatness of Moshe Legavi the others was it could be at any moment. And he didn't have to have the whole Hachana, because he'd already made the Hachana so many times before, that he was just a kli at any moment, the Nevuah. And that's the whole deal with Moshe Rabbeinu, that he, the whole thing with Miriam and the whole Richas Ainian, and do it, that therefore he, at any moment, he was likely to get a gili of the Dibur. You follow?
So does the Navi then not have to make a tzimtzum between the Nevuah and the Am?
Yeah, well, he maybe did. That's a good question. Did he need a Maturgaman? Did he need a Maturgaman to get it over? Yesh leima shekain v'yesh leima shaloi. It could be that there was certain in him that Einochanami, he needed people, his Talmidim, to give it over to each of the Navim had Talmidim. Das is Zicha. And we find that the Kohen Gadol, we might mention the Sheokloi, the Kohen Gadol is described by certain Rishonim as having Talmidov. He had all people around him, and they were like, if he was an emes Kohen Gadol. So we have all these people, they were Makablim from the Nevi'im, and they're called the Bnei HaNevi'im. There's such a lesson occurs in the Tanakh in a couple of places. So a Talmud is like a Ben. They state that the Bnei HaNevi'im. So they maybe gave over something, but there were certain things that were so clear that the Navi was able to give them over directly. It would be dependent on the situation and what was the madrega of the particular type of Nevuah he was giving over. You understand? Or with Moshe Rabbeinu, he also, first of all he gave it over to Aaron, and then he called in the Bnei Aaron, and then he gave it over to them again, and it went with a whole Seder. The Gemara Masechta Yuma, there's a famous price of that in the Soptrei Tal of Yuma. But there's a whole Seder, Rashi brings it in Devarim, Rashi brings it down. That there's Seder HaMishnah, that first of all Moshe said it, and then he came in on Aaron, and then Aaron said it later to his sons, even though Moshe Ben also told it to them, but then they chazed it over, and a whole Seder visas is gegangen. You follow? Also upon him, Lefi Zeh kommt es, that Oisius are Lefi Oifana Aetem, and it depends who you are and what you are, according to that, that's the way the Oisias come out. And we could be married and that with further dugmois, but everybody's saying ad masai v'chulu that we have to go further. But there's further dugmois like inyan zeh. Therefore, a person's got to be very, as one on. That's a tremendous zahirus that you have to have in dibur. And indeed, if in Nakiyus HaDibur, you have to speak only clean things and never say Nivul Pechach V'Sholem V'Chos V'Cholila V'Chulo, because al yidei say you can be back the other way, you can be Matameh the Etzem. And then, of course, once that happens, then the Etzem gives out, but unfortunately, Tommy Dikh Zach. And therefore you have to be tremendously careful, what you say and how you say it, and particularly the whole union of unclean statements and unclean language and things of that nature is very, very strict and terrible thing in Yiddishkeit. And therefore it's brought down that, well, anyway, it's, the Gemara says that those who menavli mespihem einam mekablim pnei hashechina, whatever that may happen to mean. But you got to be very medactic with the inyan adibur, because it's lefi oifen ha'etzem, and the oisias that come out are an expression of your etzem. That's part of the kashi. There's a very close connection between the oisias b'chlal of a mensch and his etzem. The oisias of the Shem are probably similar. They probably have a close connection with the etzem of your nefesh, because we see that oisias are b'chlal, a giluit of a certain extent of the etzem. V'gam, says the Rebbe, maybe you might want to say, well, no, the whole union from the Shem really doesn't have any great connection be emes lamite with the etzem, because we'll tell you that the real union of the name is not, the whole union of the name is kiwa going mumayla lamata. That's what you might want to tie now. You might want to say that the name gets the inyanim over into the nefesh, into the guf, and then afterwards it goes out, and the ikka is it appears in the world that we should be able to call one another by names, and that there should be azulas can relate to you, and the way he can relate to you, not just one zulus, but a whole public of zulasim should be able to relate to you. That's be'ika through your name. And therefore we'll say that the whole union of the Gili of Shem is really, why do we not see all the connections? Because it's not really for that. Its whole union is that it comes down by Hamshocha in order to go out from the Adam and only be a convenience, as it were, in the world, Shikui Seba Shmoi, and therefore doesn't really have any close connections with the Etem. Even though that's a little bit posterior to what we just said, but maybe you might want to, that's a touch Gam EF Shalom. In other words, you might want a taina. As our taina, so therefore the Rebbe showed that, which means that we go back to the kasha that there is a connection of the Etzem and the Shem. V'gam EF Shalom Hashem hu rak ela zula sheyikra oisei bishmoi. That's impossible to say anything like that, because then you would get out of all the problems. Ki vadai gam im loy hoya zulas hoya tzodik leha sheim. Well, this is for sure that even if there wasn't a zulas, that you would need your name, like we pointed out before, that if you didn't have a name, then cholila, you wouldn't have a whole amshocha from the nefesh l'maylam yaguf into the group. And therefore says the Rebbe does a zicher that you would need the name even if there wasn't any zulas at all. And this is the famous dogma from Robinson Crusoe, how to somebody living out or born on a desert island or something, and you would say, well, he doesn't have a name and he's perfectly healthy. Oh no, he does have a name, and he needs the name. Very importantly, just that nobody ever called him the name. So you might say, well, why not Kamina? Nobody ever called him the name. So what's the difference? So that's what he puts in bracket. that shahatinoi koidem shenikru b'shem ein achayes boy begilui kol kach kemoyle acher shekoidem say b'shem. In other words, what the Rebbe wants with that practice to show is that a Vadi needs the name even before they call it, because he's got it even if they don't call it. I might have committed, then whether they call him a name or whether they don't. The calling of the name does alter the emphasis of the Gilui of the Chayas Alidei the Oasis. In other words, once you actually call the Oasis, well, that stirs up and is magdil the ability of those Oasis to be mamshit to Chayas into the body. So therefore, the Rebbe, if you're a person that knows very well how to be medactic in these inyonim, you'll see a difference in the child between koidem kriyas shmoy and leachrei kriyas shmoy. In other words, there's a difference in the oifen ha'achayis with the ganze arichas padova, as the one on the famous Sippa. I think it was with the Mittler Rebbe. I think it's given to the Rebbe, the Samech Tes. So, or maybe I've forgotten exactly who it was. That after the bris, he was only a very small child. All of a sudden he started, really hollering and giving trouble and crying and being upset and not wanting to eat properly. And I said, well, I don't know what on earth is wrong with this child. Everything seems to be perfectly normal. The doctors couldn't figure what's going on. So they went to the Alter Rebbe, who was it? I've forgotten exactly. And he says, something, what you have to do is put a telescope on him. He's only a small child. He's just after the bris. A few days after the bris, a couple of weeks after the bris, put on him a telescope. So they get the smallest, weediest telescope they can get hold of. They put on the child, and all of a sudden he was happy. He was a different child. But that was after the bris. That was after they called him a name. He didn't complain about after they called him a name. He was hollering, and the only way to stop it, the Alter Rebbe said, was to put him a telescope. So we're not knowing nowadays in Yonim Ke'ela of Al-Kaponim after 3 years old, and there is such a thing in putting on telescope and teaching brachas, because there are different gradations in the Gilui of the Arachayas Pe'hagur. So now Mikol Mokim goes back to the original Kasha that there is a big connection between and EF Shalom, and just means don't answer me that. Don't try to answer the whole thing by saying that, because that's Bechlal not correct. We're back to the fact that the Shem does have a shaykhus with the Chayas and with the Etzer. Mikol Mokim, says the Rebbe, Hari Begirui, in Revelation, Ein Ze Nika Klal. Shashem Nogeh Eloi, that the Shem is ad kei kach important to him. You don't really notice that, and it's not visible by Golui, and even that difference between Leachrei Kriyas Shmoy by the Tinach and other, it's not something that is easily visible, or it's what you might call visible to the normal eye, etc., etc. In other words, that even though it does have a connection with the Shem and the Oasis that you give out and from your etzem and so on, but it's all not something that's clearly visible and recognizable. It's there, but it all works in a way of Helen. In Rebbe, Ein Ze Nik Klal Shashem Nogeh Eloi, Ushotzirik Li'eis Tavki Shem Ze, and he must have Tavki this name and not another name, or even get the Chayes V'chulu. Im Kain, says the Rebbe, Mizeh Muvan She'ena B'chinas Kiruv Ub'chinas Devekes Elai. So from that we come back to our point that the Shem is not like Oyer. Oyer is B'chinas Devekes in its etem, and it's Kiruv Godel Ela etem, and therefore when you see the Oyer, you come to recognize the etem, and you see that you see the Devekes in the etem, and you come to know Milos etem, and all those inyonim we saw before. With the inyan and Shem, none of those inyonim function that way by the inyan of Shem. And even though there is a certain connection, even that is not Begolui. So we're going to see later on in Cain what all that means by summing up. What are we Lamai nafkimina binyonim of understanding in a more general way. Yesh lema said the Rebbe, Shazeu al derech, or this type of relationship, which mitzad echad is very essential, or mitzad sheni is not really clear and nikah to the observer. We could say, and we could understand that, al derech hamavur b'makim acher ha'efresh bein oisius de Torah shebiksav le oisius de Torah shebial peh. The difference between letters haraya in the oral Torah, in the Mishnah and the Gemara, in the great Poskim, for example, and the oisius haraya in a Sefer Torah and in Torah shebiksav beklal. The Torah shebal peh harei eno nogeya ha'oisius klal. That's very interesting, that expression klal, because we do find sometimes that the oisius in the Mishnah are a bit, not just a bit, they are sometimes very important, in the sense that, the Gemara says, Asakash on the Mishnah, and then it says, Chasuri Mechsera, and then it says lacking something, that something managed to get out of the Mishnah. Really, there's another little phrase should be present in the Mishnah, etc., etc., otherwise it doesn't really make sense, according to that diktuk. And other such inyonim that we see that the Mishnah could have said it this way, and since it didn't, it said it in a slightly different way, that's maybe an afkamina to the Havana of the Mishnah by Ifim Klali, or in the Gemara, similarly to that, or sometimes in the great Poskim, the fact that they said it Davki by Ifim Kazer, and they didn't, bring a Raya Me'ezim Mokim Acher, etc. That's a sign they hold this way. As you guys are learning the Yodeh, you see the great diktuk that there is in the Ksiva, the Taz compared to the Shachar Ka'itza B'zeh. It's hard to say klal. What does the Rebbe mean by that? It's not nogeya the oisius klal. He said v'yochol liyes b'oisius elu u'b'oisius achei. In other words, what the Rebbe means is that sof kol sof, what is important in Torah shebial peh is the concepts, the musag, and the knowledge of what is the point al pi halacha. That's what is important. And therefore, once you've understood the Mishnah, you could give over to somebody and tell him what the Mishnah is saying in a way which is not what's written in the Mishnah, and yet he would know the pshat of the Mishnah. And he'd be able to say over quite well what is written in that Mishnah. Now, aduma, what the kavanah is this famous pirush on the Mishnayos, which is called the Kahati pirush. You ever seen it? These Mishnayos. Yeah, you ever seen them? Pinchas Kahati. Yeah. So he's a yid that he wrote this pirush on the Mishnayos, and he was a bank clerk or something. He was a person who worked most of his life, and in his spare time when he came home in the evening, he used to write this pirush on the Mishnah. He was a yid of London, a Groisa, and a Yodea Sefer Groisa, and that's how he wrote it. But if you look how he does it, he takes the Mishnah and he puts it for you in simple ways, and he writes almost the whole Mishnah over with a beer, you understand? So let's say somebody asks you wrote the whole piece of Kahati on that Mishnah, and then somebody asks you what's written in the Mishnah, and you said more or less what he says, then people would know what the Mishnah is telling us, even though they haven't actually said the actual oisis of the Mishnah. You follow? Ma'ashekin in Torah shebiksav, it's not like that. In Torah shebiksav, if you misquote the pasuk or you say the pasuk incorrectly, then that is a shturim dika. It's a shturim dika mistake. It's a very important blunder. And ad k'dei kach, that if the Sefer Torah's got a mistake, you can't even read from it. You can't read one, meaning that the amshocha alidei kriyas Torah is just not gonna. It's just not going to happen if you read Be'oisius Loi Meduyokis Betachlis, which means that the Gilui is so high in Torah Shebiksav that it can only come over, and it was made exactly by the Eibishter to fit Le'oisius Elu, Loi Le'oisius Acheirim. And for that we need the whole Torah should be al peh to explain me what so-called the psukim and the kavanah of these psukim ultimately did they mean in a more life way, application. And that's the union from Torah should be al peh. In other words, what do we need? Torah should be al peh in such a tremendous massivity of detail, because we can't always understand the ultimate kavanah of the Torah Shebiksav, because it's very high in Yon Elikus, which come only alidei oisius elu v'lo b'derech acheres, and if they're given out by oisius achedim, even there's a toys in one of the oisius, but that is mavalbul, the gilui of that inyan. We have to say that if somebody heard a kriya from a Torah, which is not a kosher, a sefer Torah, it could be that in a dachastika way, he wouldn't be a kli to understand that inyan, but even hanochin, afilu, when he was explained the inyan, yosef betiktuk al piter shabal peh, because he melchatchila got it, even bilti nochin. Well, from that we see that the Indian, the oases over there are tremendously important, and the Torah and the Sefer Torah can't give over its message. Biladei oases ilu betachlis adiktu. So that's the point we're making. So the Rebbe says that it's in Torah Shavah oases klal. That's what he means by klal. V'yochel liyes ba'oases elu ba'oases it's only that the oases of the Mishnah are tremendously holy oases. They're the oases of the Tanoim, and also Zichar. If you say it in their oases, you get all sorts of tremendous hashpurs. But when you get to the understanding of the Mishnah, which is so-called off the tachlis of Torah Shebal Peh, it doesn't really matter which way you said it, as long as the Makabel got the right idea. Mashen came, but Torah Shebiksav, Hari Nogeh ha'oisiyah. It's very important, and it's tremendously essential, the letters themselves. Shetorik liyos bo'esis el adavki, loy b'oesis achenim, v'davki b'tmuna zu, and davki, even the shape of the oasis is tremendously important. And therefore, if somebody wrote the word, but he wrote the os was not kosher, al pidin, even though he meant it to be that particular os, then that particular amshocha won't be nimshach. Alidei posik zeh. Ad kedika. Harei yesh lo oasis shayches el oer shenimshach alidei oasis eilu davke. What is in your Torah should be? Biksav. Mikol mokim and nonetheless harei oasis levad. Shahin do. I'm sorry. Hariheim oasis mikol mokim hariheim oasis levad. They're only oasis. Says the Rebbe. What do we mean by that? Shahin dova acher miha oir ubepinas nivdal minha etem. That they're how do you call it? A dova acher, they're a separate inyan from the oil, and so they can be called a dova acher minha etem. In other words, the etem means here the very essence of the oil which is coming over in Torah Shebiksav. So he said, despite the fact that they're so important, nonetheless, they're a dova acher legabide, the etzem message or the etzem light of that inyan in Torah Shebiksav. So here we see a classical example of how do you call it, having your cake and eating it too. I mean, on the one hand you say one thing, and on the other hand you kilo seem to be eating up what you just said. I mean, you said, oh no, in Torah Shebiksav it's tremendously important, the oasis, otherwise it's not going to be mishgala. Now he says, oh, the oasis are dova acher min ha'etem. So, I mean, how does that get together? So therefore the Rebbe says, emes, they're tremendously important, but he said, sof kol sof, they're a lavush. And a lavush and a etzem, by definition, not the same thing. In other words, there's always a lavush and there's the etzem. It's only that there are two forms of lavush. There's what we call a lavush nifrad, and then there's what we call a lavush hamiyu had. And it's a different, a lavush nifrad, like the coat of a suit or even a shirt that a person wears. He takes it on and he takes it off and puts it on. Lefi retoyinei bli called shinoi v'chuli. But if you told him to take off his skin and put it on, then he'd really be in trouble. Even though the skin is only a lavush. Come over in the pasuk, oyer ubasa tal bisheni. It's a pasuk. It says that you dress me up in skin and flesh, which means that the oil is only a lavush, sof kol sof. However, it's a lavush hamiyuchad, and that means that there must always be that yichud. You could never imagine that yichud ever separating itself, and that is the unusual. That is the unusual ma'aseh with the nochash. He's one of the few that every now and then he changes his skin. One in anochas. And therefore that's brought down. The whole reason the Zohar, the Alter Rebbe, in Perek Mem Zayin, the Alter Rebbe in Tanya hints at it. That's the inyan that his skin is changeable, because it's like the inyan from Klippas Noiga, or the inyan from Klippa that should really be put off. But against inyan that you have to throw off the effect of the nachash in yourself by changing the skin, which is Klippas Noiga. You got to throw it off. But you can't throw off your own skin, but do a klach. So the child, only by the nose, what he's similar to the clippers, what they come to do is, there was a kind of mochim lahari bekesher elo. When I get to rov creatures, the skin and the etzem Adam himself are inseparable. So in Ruchnias, we also have Levushim, or that's in from Oisias as well known. We have what's called Oisias HaMakshova and Oisias HaDibur. So I put down that Oisias HaMakshova, they are Levush Miu Chad. In other words, that they are united be'etzim with the Nefesh. Therefore, you can never imagine Nefesh b'li Makshova. And the Mittler Rebbe's got a whole piece about it in one of his Maimorim, where he says that even if somebody says to you now, I'm not thinking, then he's thinking that he's not thinking. He's thinking about the fact that he's not thinking. No, he's trying to persuade himself from Machshava that he's not being Machashev, or he's being Machashev about telling you that he's not thinking. In other words, that you can never stop thinking. Wherever there's Nefesh, there must be Oisias HaMakshova. Wherever you got Nefesh, you must have Oisias HaMakshova. And afilu b'shas ha'sheino, kiyadu, the mensch is mamshik, to think, afilu b'shas ha'shlo. Kiyadu, that the peoples, but the very high Talmidei Chachomim and Oiskim B'Torah Lishmo, when they're asleep, they also chap all sorts of chidushim in Torah. So he's looking at me blankly. What do you mean to say it never happened to you yet? In other words, that they chap all sorts of chidushim while they're sleeping. You guys are not into the game. there's even Chachomim, what they talk Divrei Torah when they're slofing. They talk Chidush Torah when they're slofing. What is the Raya? It's a Raya from the Gemara Masech Tes Sukkah, a story. And the Gemara Masech Tes Sukkah, I think it's the Zweite Perek it is. And back to Gemara door it as Reverend Gamliel had an Eved when he was called wie hat geheißen? Forgotten his name. What was his name? Tevi. Yeah, Tevi. Yeah, Tes Beis Yud. Tavi or Tevi. Yeah, that's the guy's in Reverend Gamliel's servant. So he was a ganzen Talmud Chacham there, Tavi. He used to know all the halachas and the mishnayos and ich weiß nicht was. He was Reverend Gamliel's Eved at gehabt. He was never Knani. His mother was Mechuyev in certain mitzvahs. He's put him in a sukkah. So what he used to do was he used to lay under the bed of the Chachomim in the sukkah. And Rabbi Gamliel used to invite Chachamim, and then when they finished for bringing whatever they were doing, then they would chap a dremel in the sukkah. You understand? They chap a dremel. And he used to hide under the bed. So they once said to him, you put him in a sukkah. And anyway, you're under a bed, you're not in a sukkah. He said, what do you do that for? Go out and slough in your hell. So he said, oh no, if I sleep under the bed, he said, I hear all sorts of chidushei. I hear all sorts of chidushei Torah. It's a tevi ever got to say so. They sloughen, what sort of, he said, you should listen when they're sloughing. He said, I pick up all sorts of chidushei Torah. Break the monkey off, break it off. He said, you see from that two madrigas in sloughing. You guys should sloth gesundheit and don't take all these things too much. You should have a good night's sleep and there soll helfen, die soll sein gesund mit alle gute Sachen. Aber der Monkey says that the two madrigas is to schlafen and it's to, dribble, sloughen, but not really sloughen. So he said, the Chachamim, they never sloughed. They just sloughed, They just sort of went out a little bit, but their minds and their Torah was still working. And he said, Adam Rogi, who misamek b'sheina. He deeps himself in the spot. But anyway, whatever. I don't know how we get on all this, I don't know. Anyway, Oisius, something to do with Oisius or something. Oh yes, Machshava. Yeah, the Machshava works until you're asleep. And here the Kiddush wasn't even Dibur can work. The Machshava works when you're asleep. Machshava is a Lavusha Miyu. In other words, that it's always there because it's Dovuk and Miyuchad with it, but it's a Lavush. Yeah, the Alter Rebbe says Machshava is one of the Lavushim. And then it's put in Lekutei Torah, an even greater Chiddush. The Alter Rebbe says that even the Koiches HaNefesh are only a lavush to the pshitas of the Etzem HaNefesh. They're also a lavush. And Mamela Nimtzlof, he said it, you got lavushim, but they're very inseparable. Lavush, we can't possibly just put that lavush off. So that's what the Rebbe is now going to say. The oasis of a Sefer Torah, oasis of their lavush miuchad. In other words, that Indian must have that lavush. If it doesn't have it, it won't be able to get across to the Makablin. Over so it's only a lavush. It's taki a lavush miuchad, but it's only a lavush. That's the classical case of how Chassidus has its cake and eats it too. On the one hand, it's only a lavush. It's a lavush miuchad. So that's what he says. Pins nivdo min ha'etzem. V'yesh lema, k'moi v'levushim. Yesh levush ha'mechubar. Mechubar means it's joined up. Levush ha'nifrad. V'k'moi machshova, hu levush ha'mechubar. And then he writes in brackets, v'diva ha'mashcha antu chad. V'lo yib'chush ben sefer tof kuf samach hey. Well, that's from the Alter Rebbe. That's my morning from the Alter Rebbe. Shek'moi kein b'koiches HaNefesh. Yeah, what the Alter Rebbe in Tanya he doesn't really say that the Alter Rebbe. But he writes it in Lekutei Torah, Makemis Masiyomim, and also in these Maimorim, that the koiches Chokma bin Adar, the Eser koiches HaNefesh, they're called tikunim, and how do you call it, ornaments. Or an ornament is a thing which is mamish miyuchad with the mensch, and that's why it makes him look beautiful, etc., because it's it's mishyachid with him. So in the same way, the koiches are mishyachid with the nefesh. They're also called a lavush miyuchad. Hainu kanal. The yesh loima, the sheim ukoyach, hey minyan. And he said that will fit in very nice with what we said before. I'm bringing you a dogma from koyach to shame, because I said to you earlier that koyach and shame are the same thing, and the koyach of the nefesh, the gabi the pshitas of the nefesh have got the same relationship as koyach, and therefore they're a dogma to shame. On the one hand, they're a lavush, but they're a lavush amiyu. Or that doesn't alter the fact that they're only a lavush. And berega, what you say lavush, and you meet two, how do you call it, basically separate inyonim. Because you and your skin, or you and your machshava are two are two people. I mean, are two not two people. I mean, you're two entities. Yeah, and yet on the other hand, it's impossible to separate between you. Over Sokolsov, you're two entities. And that's what we're trying to say. The Torah Shebiksav, the Oisias are joined, but Sokolsov, the Oisias are a levush, and that's what we're trying to say. But again, to shame. The shame is tremendously connected up, and it's tremendously important. But it's Sokolsov only a levush. Mashikin oir is not a levush. Legabi the moya, oir is a gilui shel hamoya. He's a ha'ora albeit, but he's a gilui min hamoya. But Dibur levush anifrod, and Dibur is a further levush. Down the scale, it's already levush anifrad, and that's what we see. You can put on your levush adibur, take it off. You can speak or not speak, according to your choice. The Alter Rebbe in the Drusei Sukkah, in the Drusim of Sukkahs in the the Alter Rebbe in the Zweite Maimah begins over there. The Alter Rebbe is masber that the oasis of the Sefer Torah are like oasis of Machshava or Malchus Peh. Torah should be al Peh Korinan law, as we say in the Pasuk Eliyahu, that Malchus is like the mouth, and Torah should be al Peh is called Malchus. Yeah. Bechinas Dibur, that's the state of Dibur, and Dibur is a levush anifrad. It's a levush, but it's a levush anifrad. Okemoi kein yuvan b'yashem. Dimi yosh tegilui achayis u'alidei yoshis elu davke. Yeah, m'kol mochim enam bechinas kiru v'shaychas ela etzem kemoi ha'oel. Yeah, that's the union of a levush, but it's not a levush like oil, which is not a levush at all. But it's a levush, but it's a levush ha'mu'u. That's the union of shame. So now he goes on with the new kashi, but we'll have to leave that till a further point in time, and we'll have the rather slightly cruel approach of leaving it with a kashi, and that is, we see that when somebody calls your name, you get a shokel. It sort of affects you almost deep inside your etzem. So he's going to try another way of showing whether there is a shaykhs with the etzem, and he's still going to come back to the same point that it's not like oyer. It's a kesher with the etzem, but they're lavush. Good. Okay. Right.
How could you call Torah Parsha B'Ksav Machshava when it's very defined? For example, a person could live in the same Russia and he would think in Russian, and he moved to America and they started thinking in English. Granted, they're thinking about the same concepts, but they're thinking in different letters.
So I didn't quite hear. Sure.
I said, how could you call Torah B'Ksav relating to the Machshava?
We mean Legabi Lamaila. It's Kivli Avis to